Tonight's presentation, Creation versus Evolution in Our Courts and Schools, also called the Defaithing of America, we're going to trace how we got from 1925, when the only thing you could legally teach in a public school in America was creation, to today, where the only thing you can legally teach in a public school is evolution. But that didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen by itself, because we're going to find out there was a parallel theme that went along with just getting evolution into the public schools. We started out as a nation created in part to ensure religious freedom. Our money says, "In God we trust." There's certain liberals that are trying to scratch that out, but we still have it. Our Congress and Supreme Court begin each session in prayer. I don't know whether you knew that. Our Supreme Court begins each year with a red mass. The Sunday before the first Monday in October, they meet at National Cathedral and have a red mass to pray over the decisions that they're going to go over that year. I don't know if you knew that was occurring. That's been occurring in our history and still occurs today. President's Prayer Service dates back to George Washington. It's held the day after the inauguration, and it's now at the National Cathedral. But just to mix things up, that National Cathedral, which if you've never been to it is a lovely cathedral in Washington, D.C., is the same place which is now holding same-sex marriages. It's a sign of the times, and it's not a good sign. How did we get to the point that religion is systematically being taken out of our schools and public institutions? Is it too late to reverse all this, or can America turn back to God? Well, God says we can. He says, "If my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land." But what's the caveat to that? If we do this. This was always open to the Israelites, and it's open to us today. It is thought that the Constitution states that there will be a separation of church and state. No such wording, no such clause exists in the Constitution. There is an establishment clause that says Congress will not establish any religion, nor will it prevent the free expression of religion. Now that kind of establishment clause was logical from our roots. Many Puritans, Quakers, Calvinists, etc. came to this country, came to this new world for religious freedom. They wanted to get away from what was happening in England. They did not want any religion established as the state religion, as Henry VIII had done with the Anglican Church in England, to where that was the only religion you could practice. The Establishment Clause was designed to prevent this, not to sanitize religion from America. Far from it. When you read the writings of our early leaders, of Washington and others, they state that without a moral compass, without Christ, without the leadership of the church, America and democracy will not stand. Again, all of this was set up to protect religion, not to get it out of government. The words separation of church and state were first used in a letter written by Jefferson, who was not a strong Christian, in 1802 to a Congregationalist group. Basically, this was a Baptist group, assuring them that this couldn't happen, that what happened in England couldn't happen here, because we had protections that would protect religion in this country. They were concerned what had happened in England would happen here. Jefferson, again, and not a strong Christian, gives us insight into the commitment to this ideal our forefathers envisioned. They envisioned a place where everyone could practice their religion, and religion was to be a part of the public realm, as demonstrated by the prayers that go on before Congress, before the Supreme Court, and all of these worship services that go on before we start. How then did we get to a point in America where Christianity seems to be under attack from all government institutions, and how has creationism been barred from the public schools? How have we gotten to the point to where Christianity seems to be under attack and being pushed out of all government, and how has creationism been barred from the public schools? Note the two parallel themes. They're not just parallel, they are intertwined, and we're going to see that and how they've both progressed over the past 90 years in this presentation. Evolution versus creation in our courts and schools The Scopes monkey trial, 1925. In 1925, there had been a law passed that forbid any teaching of evolution in the schools. You had to only teach creation. There were some people unhappy about that, and they wanted to test that. I've got a video clip that I'm going to show you that will give you the background to the Scopes trial, which happened in 1925.
The classroom in the courtroom, that's what the Scopes trial was all about. What was allowed to be taught in the public schools. This is where the public sat to watch the proceedings that day. 1,000 people jammed into this small courtroom. 200 news reporters covered the event. What was on trial that day was the constitutionality of a law passed that same year in 1925 in Tennessee, which forbade the teaching of evolution. In response to that law, ACLU lawyer Clarence Darrow said it was the height of bigotry to teach only one view of origins. You know, I agree with him. But today, it is the creationists who are being discriminated against, and now the bigotry is on the side of the evolutionists.
The Scopes trial began when the ACLU decided to challenge this law that prohibited the teaching of evolution in Tennessee public schools. Bud Shelton, who testified in the trial as a 17-year-old who was in Scopes' class, remembers how the trial came about.
And the American Civil Liberties Union offered to sponsor the defense of any man who was willing, or any teacher who was willing to defy or test that trial.
Some Dayton businessmen saw the ACLU's offer as a chance to put Dayton on the map. Dr. Cornelius, professor of Bryan College and authority on the Scopes trial, comments,
The Scopes trial was basically a publicity stunt to gain attention for the city of Dayton and for its economic and industrial interests. They couldn't get the regular science teacher to come forth and to be a guinea pig and make this a test case. And so they invited a new teacher who was really not a science teacher but a coach and a mathematics teacher to volunteer to be the guinea pig to test the case. And so John Thomas Scopes volunteered to do this, and the beginning of the trial was underway.
When the famous lawyers William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow offered their services free of charge, the vision to put Dayton on the map was beginning to be fulfilled. When the trial itself took place from July 10th to the 21st, the city of Dayton took on a carnival atmosphere.
They erected hot dog stands and various other things to, to sell souvenirs and that sort of thing. And they thought, well, they were going to make it big, but that didn't materialize.
But despite the carnival atmosphere, Darrow used the trial not so much to promote academic freedom, but to belittle biblical fundamentalism as personified in William Jennings Bryan. Darrow's anti-religious sentiment was clear throughout the trial and was clearly seen a few years later when he returned to Dayton, saw a church being constructed, and quipped, "I guess I didn't do much good here after all." Popular histories of the Scopes trial have distorted the event, such as the film and play Inherit the Wind.
It may be a very arresting drama, but it's very inaccurate history. And in fact, the two authors of it, Lawrence and Lee, say in their preface that this is not the Scopes trial.
Distortions or not, overall, people remember the Scopes trial as promoting the idea that man came from the apes.
The Scopes trial was, while it was a trial that had a verdict, it was a little bit of a construct, a little bit of a put-on. One of the things he presented Nebraska man as if it was a full skeleton to Bryan, and the truth of the matter is all they'd found is a tooth, which turned out to be a pig's tooth. So there were huge problems with what was put on there. Here's a setup for what was really going on. 1925 in Dayton, Tennessee, small town, this gentleman, John Scopes, who was really a coach, was recruited to teach evolution against this law that had been put in there saying that you could only teach creation. None of the other science teachers would do it. He taught evolution in violation of Tennessee law forbidding anything but creation. This was called the Butler Act. He never even got to teach much. The thing was such a setup that he was in there as a substitute teacher in the classroom that day. He's in the front of the class. The media and the sheriff is in the back of the classroom. He opened the book and said, "Darwin says." That was all he got out, because they came up and arrested him and took him out of the classroom. William Jennings Bryan, who ran for president 3 times, was recruited as the lead prosecutor. He was supposed to uphold Christian right and wrong. There was a carnival-like atmosphere in Dayton, as it was talked about. Roger Baldwin, who was the father of the ACLU, he had arranged for the defense of Sacco and Vanzetti 5 years earlier. If you don't remember that trial, those were people put on for treason, for getting government secrets. Clarence Darrow, who was the foremost defense attorney of the time, was recruited by Baldwin. This was only the second case for the ACLU, and he was to defend Scopes because they were really after this law. The intelligentsia did not want Butler Acts, did not want acts that said you could only teach creation. Darrow said during the trial, interesting this quote, "Right and wrong have no meaning, only truth is what matters." How can you have truth if there's no right and wrong? But fascinating concept. Scopes was convicted. That never comes out. They convicted him and he was fined $100. However, the conviction was overturned on a technicality later, basically because all he got out was 2 words before they arrested the guy. There's a lot of things that added up to this. 8 years later, you have the writing of what's called the Humanist Manifesto in 1933, in which a group of atheists got together and said, "We have religion without God," and it's basically us. Julian Huxley called humanism religion without revelation, and Michael Kalenda said it's religion without God. All of these people are worshiping who? Themselves. Humanism says man is the ultimate. We get to decide what's right and wrong. One result of the Scopes trial was a downplaying of evolution in the schools and the textbooks. Most textbooks up till 1957 to 60 would only have a couple thousand words about evolution, development, or speciation in them. That will change radically after Sputnik. What was Sputnik? First satellite that the Russians put up in 1957. Really, it was very simple. It was a very simple metal sphere that beeped a lot. It sent down radio signals, and it was only in orbit for less than a year. But it scared the bejeebers out of the United States. Why? Because it said we were behind. We couldn't put, every time we tried to launch a rocket at this point, guess what? It exploded. It blew up or hit the ground or something. We were having terrible stuff, terrible failures. Look what happened once we got scared and we said, okay, we've got to inject pure science into our curriculum. From 1960 through 1963, the amount of evolution in our textbooks went from about 2,500 words up to 33,000. And now it goes down after that, but that's only because the textbooks of today, if you look at them, are less dense than the textbooks of yesterday. A lot of those textbooks that were published in 1950, 1960 are much more thorough than what we put out today. We have dumbed down America. But the percentage of evolution is still at the same height. At the same time that we are preaching evolution is true, we are preaching to our kids they are animals and that they're not descended from God, that they're an accident of nature. What else happens? Do you think it's accidental that in 1963 the amount of violent crimes started to rise radically? Notice that before 1960, population growth and the amount of violent crime was right in step. It was happening we have more people, we'll have a little more violent crime. We have less people, we'll have a little less. But now population growth is gone and the amount of violent crime just shoots up 995% within a short period of time. Why? If you teach Johnny that he's an animal, guess what? He's going to act like one. Gonorrhea and the sexually transmitted diseases in just the kids 10 to 14 had been very low up until 1960. As of 1963, what happens to sexually transmitted diseases in middle school kids? It explodes. Life is an accident. Evolution, no absolutes. Life has no meaning. People are animals. There is no God. If this is what Johnny can read and write, then this news shows that Johnny really does understand his lessons. Another student shooting. And how many of those are we seeing today? All too many. The 60s, you had free love and free sex. If you're going to have free love and free sex, what have you said about the Bible? It's not relevant. It's not true. We don't have to pay attention to it. Freedom to do drugs. Is that in line with God's direction that the body is the temple? Freedom to protest and disobey authority. What was Adam and Eve's first problem in the garden? They disobeyed. They disrespected authority. God is dead. We are in control. Is that a complete antithesis of what the Bible tells us? And there's open rebellion to all authority, which man has been in rebellion to God from the start. The fact that those people who grew up during this time period are now the people leading our country, and that is affecting where we're going.
But it was happening before then.
It was happening before then, but there's an explosion that goes on during the 60s and 70s. Hollywood and our culture. From Frankly, My Dear, I Don't Give a Blank in 1948, who said that? Rhett Butler and Gone with the Wind. That was the first cuss word. You now have widespread cussing in R-rated films. From Separate Beds for Dick and Laura Petrie in 1959 to Living and Sleeping Together. How many characters on Blue Bloods, which is supposed to be about a conservative Catholic family, how many of those guys are having multiple affairs? 3 of them. And it's been portrayed on the show. From gay being a redefined word in the 1930s, what did gay used to mean? Happy. To gays being ostracized in films, then they got made fun of, and now an inclusion of 15% of the characters. What percent of America is actually gay? 2%. You ask most people, and because of what they see on TV, they'll say anywhere between 15 and 33%. I asked my own mother, what do you think? She said 21%. The actual amount of gays in America is 2%. But because every 5th or 6th character on TV is a gay, we start thinking, well, they're all over the place. Hollywood went from glorifying the 10 Commandments, the story of Ruth, the robe, Going My Way with Bing Crosby, to Christianity almost universally portrayed as what? Bigoted, ignorant, corrupt, and dangerous. From Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver to My Three Sons and Bonanza. That was very subtle, and everything that's happened here is extremely subtle. What was the subtle difference between Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver and My Three Sons and Bonanza for you people who saw all those programs? My Three Sons and Bonanza were led by what? A single parent household. A man which in this case had been widowed in both cases. That's step one. Now we go to Family Affair and the courtship of Eddie's father and the Partridge Family. This is the next step. These people aren't widowed, they're what? Separated, divorced, and for the first time with the Partridge Family, who's the head of the household? A mother. Okay? Again, can single-parent households work? Yes. And in point of fact, the moral of the story is they probably work better than 2-parent households. And then we get to Three's Company, where it just basically says what? Anything goes. You can live together, there's no marriage, sex is all you need, and all that kind of stuff. Hollywood had served as a showcase of American culture for generations. Patriotism, hard work, fair play, and even religious fervor permeated the screens. That's what they saw, because that's what the general public wanted, and they give the general public what they want. But in 1960s, this is according to Michael Medved, who is a critic of Hollywood, they talked about that there was an invasion of a Marxist Ivy League group that became the people who led Hollywood. As a whole, the entertainment industry no longer reflects the religious, patriotic, and political views of America. You ever wondered how we can have all this stuff projected in movies in Hollywood, and yet Kansas and Nebraska don't believe in what they're seeing on the screen? There's a disconnect here, because what's in Hollywood is very different. Hollywood has been dominated by cynical, nihilistic cultural elite who despise religion in general and the Catholic Church in particular for its long opposition to the secular virtues of, look what they call virtues, fornication, adultery, divorce, abortion, and homosexuality. And that's what they're pushing in films. That's what they're pushing on TV. In 1965, the Academy Award for Best Picture went to the lyrical The Sound of Music, which is a great film. 4 years later, Midnight Cowboy, a bawdy tale of a male hustler in New York City, became the only X-rated film to win the award. But that's not the last one. 2000, you've got American Beauty, where the whole film is about an old man lusting after a little girl. And that's the film of the year. That is Hollywood's best, supposedly. Science fiction, I really worry about our kids. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is making a comeback with a movie this year. X-Men, they all teach what? Evolution not only is true, but it will create the superheroes of tomorrow. Evolution is good. Mutations are good. All creation is possible. And anybody who resists change is evil. And what kind of change would Satan like to push? Forget that Bible. You're God. Now let's talk about the court cases that are going along with all this. Torcaso versus Watkins in 1961. In this case, the Supreme Court defined that secular humanism, thinking that man is God, is a religion. Those who are not believing in God still have conscientious objector protection. This was because you had draft dodgers at that point. The Supreme Court listed non-theistic religions, Buddhism, Taoism, ethical culture, Confucianism, and secular humanism, and others as religions. It's interesting that they would define it that way because they're not going to be consistent with that when we get to the end of this list. Just remember that one. Here's where they took shots at creation. Engel versus Vitale, 1962. We banned devotional prayers. New York public schools allowed reciting devotional prayers in school. The Supreme Court banned this as a state activity in 1962. Abington versus Shemp, 1963. No devotional Bible reading. The Abington Township in Pennsylvania required devotional Bible reading followed by the recitation of the Lord's Prayer. Baltimore also had the practice of reciting the Lord's Prayer. This was challenged by the son of Madalyn Murray O'Hair. You who don't know that, Madalyn Murray O'Hair during the 70s and 80s was the queen atheist of the United States. She was the person who was pushing against anything, any type of God in any court, school, or anywhere else. The court struck down both practices, and both states had to stop the devotional Bible reading and the Lord's Prayer in their schools. Epperson versus Arkansas, 1968. You remember the Tennessee law that had started the Scopes trial? The Butler Act had said that you could only teach creation, not evolution, in public schools. In point of fact, states all over America had those laws, and it is now in 1968 that the Arkansas law that said you could only teach creation and not evolution was finally taken to court. Like the Tennessee Scopes law, the Supreme Court struck it down. In the 2 decades following the removal of prayer and Bible reading in the public schools, what do you think is going to happen to our society after we take prayer and Bible reading out of the public schools? Divorce rate went up 100%. Drug use increased 500%. Violent crime increased 350%. Standardized test scores dropped 18 years in a row. Premarital sex exploded by 1,000%. If there's no God, there's no rules. Suicide increased by 250%, and sadly there was just another suicide in Seguin a couple of days ago by a young boy. Roe versus Wade had an unimaginable impact. January 1973, we legalized abortion on demand in this country. Let's talk about some background concepts for this. Conception versus birth. Christians believe, when is the baby a human being? From conception, and DNA evidence shows that it's a human being. And yet, what have the courts ruled? Until birth. That's why you have partial birth abortions in the 3rd trimester. If the baby comes all the way out, it is a human being. So what they actually do with a 3rd term, what they call partial birth abortion, is take the baby halfway out of the room, kill it, and then take it the rest of the way out. And I'm sorry if that offends you, but it does offend me. Women's reproductive rights are part of this whole discussion. Of course, this is women and men and society saying they have more rights than who? God and somebody else. The baby. The baby. How many people were killed in the Holocaust? 6 million Jews, but there were other ethnics that were killed. It was a total of 11 million. Genghis Khan killed how many people during his conquests? 40 million. How many babies have been killed in America since 1973 via abortion? 61 million. We have done more damage, we have killed more babies in this country than Genghis Khan and Hitler put together. We are not God created, but animals. That's what evolution preaches, and that's the background for this whole thesis of we can destroy what they just call a fetus or tissue. God is not the authority over life. And again, that's the presupposition for all of this. Do you know the actual background about this? Roe was someone that the lawyer recruited to test this case. The actual person who wanted to get an abortion was not Roe, but who? The lawyer representing her. And after this case, she actually did get an abortion. And what happened to her 10 years later? She changed her mind. She is on the circuit today going around and telling people what kind of mistake she made, because does that act haunt her till this day?
She was the lawyer?
The lawyer was the one, she recruited this woman, Roe, to represent it, but the lawyer was the one who wanted to press the case. But she needed somebody out there to do it for her. Daniel v. Waters, 1975, the Sixth Court of Appeals struck down the Tennessee balanced treatment law requiring an equal amount of emphasis to be given to biblical creation that is given to evolution in the public text. After they struck down the laws that said you could only teach creation in the public schools, what a lot of states passed was balanced treatment laws that said, okay, if you teach evolution, that's fine, but then you also have to teach creation. If you don't teach evolution, you don't have to teach creation. You just have to have a balanced approach. The Seventh Circuit said that this violated separation of church and state. The defendant in the case was Daniel, who was the head of the state textbook committee. 1980, Stone versus Graham, you could no longer post the 10 Commandments in public places. And incidentally, that battle's still raging today. There's places in Alabama where they will not take them down. Seagraves versus California, 1981. A father brought suit saying that the discussion of evolution in class violated his and his kids' free expression of religion, because he said evolution is a religion in itself, which the Supreme Court had said in the Torcaso case in 1961. And yet this court said that evolution teaching allows free exercise of religion. How you get that warped decision, I don't know. McLean versus Arkansas, 1982. The question is the constitutionality of the Arkansas balanced treatment law. Arkansas had passed a balanced treatment law which said if you teach evolution, you got to teach creation. And this will lead to a trial in 1987 called Scopes II. What they were testing in this trial in 1987 was the constitutionality of Act 590. Again, Arkansas had passed this balanced treatment law. What eventually happens in this trial is Judge William Overton will ban Arkansas from using this law, saying that you can't teach creation in the schools. One of the main key players in this trial was Overton's Methodist bishop, who testified, sadly, much like the 2 popes ago might have, that there's no contradiction between evolution and the Bible. And Overton said, okay, if that's fine with my Methodist bishop, then I need to throw out all this creation stuff because it's not even what the theologians are going with. Established in 1987 is the problem that we deal with today, because there was an establishment of a precedent, and that precedent was that there's going to be 2 rules of evidence in these trials. Evolution is assumed to be true. Creation needs to be proved. How do you prove creation? Yes, ma'am.
They haven't proved evolution.
Oh, that's a true statement. But what they do, what has happened in every trial since then, all the way up to the 2005 Dover trial, is that they assume that evolution is science and that the Bible and creation are just myth. The media coverage in 1987 was similar to the Scopes trial. The creationists chose not to appeal this law in Arkansas because it was badly worded. The sad part that came out of this trial was the martyrdom of Robert Gentry. And when I say martyrdom, it wasn't that he was killed. Gentry, who had been the guy who was the paleochloric halo expert and also had given us such expert background in that radiometric dating technique was not good and that coal formation showed very recent formation, all good creation evidence. Because he testified at this trial, he was fired from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. There was another balanced treatment law in Louisiana. It was better worded, so the American Center for Law and Justice, that is basically a Christian law firm, tax-free law firm, took that case to the Supreme Court in what was called Edwards v. Aguillard. And this was the Louisiana equal treatment law. Like Arkansas, it said that if you teach one, you must teach both evolution and creation. And again, it was better worded for appeal. The Supreme Court struck it down as well. Their rationale for the Supreme Court to strike it down was just like Overton's opinion. Scientific creationism is not science. It's biblical or religion or myth because of its inspiration. This was their note. Because it came from Genesis, it cannot be science. Now let's analyze that for a moment. What if we barred the use of everything with a mystical origin that doesn't just come out of a textbook or a laboratory? Do you know how Tesla got his idea for an alternating current motor? It came in a vision. If you read the history of Tesla, this guy was nuts. But do we throw away electricity, or do we still use it today? We still use it today, even though this guy was Fruit Loop. Socrates' view of reality came from a prophetess. And yet, do we still quote and read from Socrates today, even though he got his stuff from weird sources? We do. Lord Kelvin, the idea of the Kelvin temperature scale was inspired biblically. Are we supposed to throw away all thermometers because they came out of the Bible? No, we keep our thermometers, we use them. Sir Francis Bacon, an essayist and philosopher, was inspired by Genesis to subdue the world commandment, and that is in all of his writings. And yet, is Bacon still read? He is. How did we get 3M Post-it notepads? Anybody know the story? Yeah, let me tell you the story. This is almost 40 years ago. At 3M, one level manager had been given the task of inventing the best super glue ever. And he was given a $400,000 budget, which for that time, 40 years ago, was a big time budget. Spent it all. They did not get a good super glue, but what they did have as an end product was probably the weakest glue ever made. He was preparing his resume because he thought, man, I'm fired. I am through. His secretary said, well, on the flip side, you know, when I put this stuff on the back of little pieces of paper, I can stick it up here right in my workstation and it reminds me to do things. The manager looked at that and said, ooh, wow. Went into the bosses and prepped this idea for 3M Post-it notepads. And of course, it became a billion-dollar industry. Who saved this? The answer is failure and a secretary that started this whole thing. Were they looking for 3M Post-it notepads? No. Did they find it by pure accident? Yes. In fact, it was a failure that they found it. And yet, do we still use 3M Post-it notepads today? Yes, we do. So this stuff that just because it came from Genesis, just because it didn't come out of a lab, is ridiculous, but it's the premise that the Supreme Court uses today to bar creation science. Again, all of this came from non-scientific, non-professional, abnormal sources, but we do not reject their validity. If it works, it works. Let's take a little bit of balance, though. Maybe all we did was draw. If we could force creationism into the public school, could somebody else force Zen Buddhism or Muslimism or Sharia law in there? Maybe so. So we do have to have a little bit of balance into this. But then on the other point, do other religions already have more access? Is there Sharia law in one county here in Texas right now? There is, and you may not have known that. It's a rural county. Do we have Marines teaching yoga and transcendental meditation, which is a form of religion? We do. So you got to wonder, are they actually already getting more access than some Christians? Antonin Scalia, who wrote the dissent in that 1987 case of Aguilard, when that thing was struck down, he gave us a ray of hope. He said, teachers might teach all theories. In other words, we can't pass a law that says if you teach evolution, you have to teach creation. But what the individual teacher might do is make their own decision to show balanced treatment, to show both creation and evolution. The problem is we have multiple examples of teachers who tried to do that, and what's happened to some of them? They've been fired for doing so. TV and movies in Hollywood, let's go back to where that's gone to in the last 30 years. Evolution teaching is now abundant on Nova and all science channels. You can't go onto public television without seeing evolution. Creationism is critically examined by all media. They don't believe it. Fantasies such as Spider-Man, X-Men, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles all underscore a belief which turns into reality for kids that mutations can be good and you can change species. You have seen in this course, give me one example of a cat turning into a dog, or a dog into a dinosaur, or a bird into a mammal. It has never been observed. And yet, what do our kids believe from what they see? Anything can mutate into anything. TV, movies, and Hollywood, the new normal. Morally good and bad mixed together. This is something the pastor talks about often. How do you get people to believe things? You give them truth, you give them truth, you give them truth, you give them truth, and what do you slip in? A lie. More action, violence, and skin each year. Because we're saying we're not responsible to God, we're only responsible to ourselves. A black on every show, that's good. But what else is on every show? A gay, because we're going to make that socially acceptable. Women's rights asserted, which means the women get to explore their sexuality. The turning point program in that was one called Sex in the City, in which 3 women got to do whatever they wanted. Traditional values are questioned and framed badly. If you're standing up for no abortion, then you're opposing women's rights and you're a bigot. The nuclear family is downplayed. What's the new family? 2 gay husbands taking care of a baby. I saw that on NCIS New Orleans just this past week and it turned my stomach. Religious is abusive, narrow-minded, and bigoted. We've now been inundated for 30 years with this thought that Christianity is a negative. Waiting for marriage, no divorce, or passé. We're now brighter than that. We are more evolved. This is where the evolution keeps coming in. We're brighter than that now. Hollywood's attitudes have been transferred to who? America. They've done 40 years of indoctrinating us with it. Webster versus South Dakota ISD. In 1990, they barred creation science from the textbooks and from the curriculum. The 7th Circuit Court of Appeals said this school district may prohibit creation science because creation science is Christianity, and Christianity is barred via the Establishment Clause. Again, was that the old intent of the Establishment Clause? Keep all Christianity out of government, out of schools? No, the intent was to protect Christianity and to protect its free exercise. But this has been turned on its ear in the past 90 years. Creation science is religion, not science. That's what the court says. Pelosa versus Capistrano Unified School District in 1994. A teacher brought suit saying that teaching evolution was teaching religion. Again, that had been defined in 1961 in the Talcaso case. But the court said evolution is not teaching religion. This was, again, was in spite of that 1961 case. The courts have turned a deaf ear to all of this. Dover School Board, 2005, required a statement be read before each evolution teaching saying evolution is only a theory with inexplicable gaps. Just reading that one statement, and then you taught all the evolution you wanted, and there was a second sentence. The second sentence was, if you want more information on something besides evolution, go to our library. We have a book called People and Pandas that you can check out. And then they taught all the evolution they wanted. Well, people went nuts and sued because they simply had that 2-line disclaimer before they taught evolution. This statement and intelligent design were banned by the court, and they said that only naturalistic explanations are science. What does that mean? Only naturalistic explanations are science. Evolution only. God cannot be the answer. He is not allowed. 2006, the Kentucky State School Board requires its textbooks to replace the dates B.C., before Christ, and A.D., Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, with B.C.E., before Common Era, and C.E., Common Era. 2006 A.D. became 2006 C.E. We are trying to sanitize God from our culture. We're trying to write Him out. 2008, the Texas Supreme Court denies a claim that the Texas law requiring a moment of silence in public school violates separation of church and state. This was sued. 2008, the Texas legislature had voted to say that actually they'd done it in 2007, had voted to say that we're going to have a moment of silence to start every school day. Somebody sued and said, okay, that's not constitutional, that's religion. Again, my question is, how can a moment of silence be religion? You ain't saying nothing. Well, fortunately, the appeals court said, you're full of it. You cannot, there's no problem with a moment of silence. This same thing was sued in Illinois, and again, it was upheld that we can have a moment of silence. So don't think we're losing every case, folks, but there's a definite trend of getting Christianity out of the schools. We have yearly nativity wars. What do I mean by nativity wars? At Christmas, is there somebody always suing because there's a nativity scene up in front of the courthouse or someplace else? That's yearly. Nativity wars and graduation wars. What do I mean by graduation wars? You can't pray before that ceremony. 50 years ago, almost every high school would have what they called a baccalaureate service. What was a baccalaureate service? It was basically a church service held in the school auditorium where they would pray for these graduates and their future. There are still a few of those going on today, but almost only in what? Private schools, not public. Although there are a few rural public schools that still have that service.
They're also censoring all the speeches that the students give credit.
Censoring isn't even the word, Steve. Minuscule surgery, microsurgery is being done on those speeches to make sure they're clean. The Institute for Creation Research in 2008 had moved themselves to Dallas from San Diego. They had applied to offer a master's degree in science, the same as they had done in California. They had offered this same master's degree out of their graduate school with Christian Heritage College in the San Diego area for more than a decade. They moved to Dallas thinking, boy, we're going to the Bible Belt, we'll have no problem. And the minute they applied, one good thing happened and one bad thing happened. The Southern Association of Schools came in and evaluated their facility and gave them an A+, said in fact their facilities, their program were superior to most of the Division II schools that they were looking at, and approved them to offer a master's degree in science. However, the head of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board got inundated by complaints from professors at Texas Tech, Texas, and others saying you can't let those creationists in here, and he violated their own rules, and for the only time in the history of that board did not follow the recommendation of Southern Association of Schools and denied accreditation for them. They sued, but in June 2010 ICR lost its appeal in court, and now they've lost their graduate school. 2009, the State Board of Education, under intense pressure, withdraws a strengths and weaknesses language in the state science curriculum. Used to say, well, you're going to have to analyze all these arguments for evolution and see whether they're strong or weak. Well, that brought the evolutionists out of the framework and said, we've got to just believe this is religion. So get that language out of there. Well, when they started to kick that language out of there, the legislature said, whoa, wait a minute, if we kick it all out, we're going to be sued by the other side. So they put in language that said analyze and evaluate, which actually was stronger for the creationists. The real problem is, folks, I've been a public school educator and a science and math teacher for 33 years. do those teachers actually pay attention to every word that's in that state curriculum? They don't. Do I make sure that I hit every one of the things that they want taught? Yes. But do I pay attention to all this stuff about analyze and evaluate exactly? No. And so what's the real effect of what was put in by the state? Almost none. The real effect is what's happening on the local end, what's happening in the school districts and what happened in those individual schools. But because they inserted this new language to analyze and evaluate and figure out whether evolution is good or not, they fired, the state legislature fired Don McElroy, who was the president of the state school board, because we can't have a creationist on that board. 1925, the only thing you could teach in schools was creation science. But today, the only thing you can legally teach is evolution. But that's not the only thing that's happened. Incidentally, notice what happened. Did that happen overnight?
No.
No, it took about 80 to 90 years for us to go from one extreme to the other. But at the same time, that wasn't the only thing occurring. We weren't just kicking creation out of the school. What were we kicking out of all of public life? God. These are intertwined, folks. Norman Geisler said, "We have come a long way from a country which based its freedom in the Creator to one which used that freedom to bar that Creator from our schools." That's eloquently put, and I'm afraid very true. Darrow and Baldwin said this battle is fought continually. Boy, I'm going to give you a couple of examples to close today about that. 1963, the Abington decision, judge said the state may not establish a religion of secular humanism, atheism, in the sense of affirmatively opposing religion. You can't just say that preferring those who believe in no religion over those who do believe. But that's exactly what the courts are doing today. The irony, the Supreme Court and Congress begin each day in what? Prayer, but it's barred in our schools. You figure that one out. Overton's court, where he struck down the balanced treatment law for Arkansas, his bailiff began each session, each day with "God save the U.S. and this honorable court." I wish they would save that court, because it needs saving. Jefferson's words, separation of church and state, have been perverted into the extra-constitutional. What do I mean by extra-constitutional? It's not in the Constitution. Excuse for sanitizing all religion from American public life. This is a direct attack from Satan. Just recently, JPL, that's the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in California, they had a Cassini team leader. Cassini was a satellite probe that was sent out to the outer solar system. David Coppage sinned. Here's how he sinned. If one of his friends, they knew he was a creationist, if somebody wanted a DVD on intelligent design, he would give it to them. Because of that, he was gagged. You will not bring any DVDs to work. You will not talk about creation. He was demoted, and then he was fired. He had to sue for compensation. Evangelist Franklin Graham was disinvited from speaking at a Pentagon prayer event due to his opinion that the religion of Islam is evil. Can't talk against Islam. Christianity, you can slap it all you want, but don't talk about Islam. Trinity University here in the San Antonio area is petitioned by a Muslim group to do away with the wording in their diplomas that said, "in the year of our Lord." I'll give credit to Trinity University. They kept the wording. History curriculum in Texas is controversial because it debates the place of Judeo-Christian ethics. Why would some people like to get Judeo-Christian ethics out of our curriculum? It's based on the Bible. It's based on God. The Virginia State Police chaplains, this is a great thing, happened in 2010, could once again invoke Jesus during their prayers. You say, well, what's weird about that? Under Governor Tim Kaine, who chaired the Democratic National Committee, chaplains were barred from praying in Jesus' name after a federal appeals court said prayers delivered on behalf of governments cannot favor one religion over another. So a chaplain who might be a Baptist or a Methodist cannot pray in Jesus' name. Fortunately, the new governor said that's foolish, and where Governor Bob McDonald, who then came in, said chaplains should be allowed to pray according to their conscience. But folks, is this a daily, year-by-year struggle? It is. Wisconsin, U.S. federal judge Barbara Crabb ruled for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, this was 2010, and argued that the National Day of Prayer, which had been going on how long?
64 years. This is the 64th year. We are having it.
Violates the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Now this is a weird story. Crabb wrote that government involvement in prayer is constitutional only as long as it does not call for religious action. You can have a day of prayer as long as you don't ask them to pray. That's what she said. So when you don't no call for prayer or Bible reading. If you just had a day of prayer and no prayer, you'd be fine. This was appealed, this decision by Judge Crabb was appealed by two very interesting groups. The ACLJ, which is Center for Law and Justice, which is a Christian legal group, was joined by President Obama. It's probably the only time those two have been on the same side in the last 6 years. President Obama went ahead with an issue of proclamation for the Day of Prayer 2010 with Judge Crabb's indulgence. The judge allowed the day to go forward. Wasn't that nice of her? Congressman Randy Forbes, who was one of 31 congressmen opposing this suit, said this represents a movement we are seeing across the country of a small minority who want to exclude faith, religion, and morality from the marketplace of ideas and seeks to unravel the very foundation of our nation was built upon. I think it should bring attention to the fact that elections do matter because the elections determine who are going to be sitting in those benches. Folks, here's the first of a few action items I'm going to give you here at the end. What's one way we're going to take back America? We got to vote. We got to vote. What our people believe and whether they're going to have a Christian worldview matters. Culture and Media Institute reports 99% of stories on major TV networks that highlight Christmas do not mention Christ. Let that sink in a minute. Most of the Christmas shows you see during December do not mention who? Christ. Santa is fine. Rudolph is fine. Don't mention Christ. They studied programming in October 2008 through October 30, 2010. 1.3% of stories mention God on all programs. We have gone from palimony to gay marriage to open gays in the military to Xmas. Xmas, what are they crossing out? Christ. I mean, I couldn't see any more deliberate thing. Louis Giglio, what happened to him in the 2013 inauguration? He was invited to come and give the prayer at the inauguration and to be a part of the group that was part of the swearing in of Obama in the 2013 inauguration. But he had given a sermon, or he'd given several sermons, in which he said homosexuality is sin. So he was disinvited. Here's one. November 2010, Federal Reserve Bank examiners told Payne County Bank in Perkins, Oklahoma, they could no longer wear American Family Association Christmas buttons in their privately owned bank. The employee-owned bank had purchased AFA's Christmas buttons for tellers to wear and to give to customers. They proved very popular. People love the buttons in this small town. Also told to remove the daily Bible verse from its website and that tellers would no longer be able to display picture frames with crosses on them or items inscribed with Bible verses. They had to throw God out of the room. The AFA, which is the American Family Association, complained to the Fed, and the Fed backed off on its ban on Christmas buttons and Christian symbols. The employees again started wearing the AFA buttons. Bible verses were back on the website, and crosses and Bible verses were back on display to the tellers. Here's the second point for what we should do. What's your action item, folks? Do we give in or do we resist? We've got to resist. We can't just say this is the way society's going. We've got to hold firm. You had the reverse Scopes trial in 1980. Again, Judge Scalia in 87 said teachers might be able to teach both creation and evolution, but there's contrary evidence to that. Lloyd Dale was a science teacher, and for 17 years he taught balanced creation and evolution. He taught both in the public schools. He was a former Teacher of the Year in the state of South Dakota. He was dismissed by the Lemon School Board in South Dakota because on his 17th year of teaching, he had a board member's son in his classroom. That board member heard that he was teaching both creation and evolution, and he had him fired even though he had been a former state Teacher of the Year. This was upheld by the South Dakota Court of Appeals. The judge commented, "This firing is legal, but it's not moral." This is what the balanced treatment laws were intended to prevent. And I did also noted that Dr. Jerry Bergman, in a very parallel way, this was a guy who taught both creation and evolution on the college level. Guess what happened to him on the college level? He was fired because he taught both. The reality is schools are run by local board politics, state and federal controls. What is ruling the nation at this point? Political correctness. Are people scared to death of being sued or not being politically correct? And so teachers are told you're not going to do anything controversial. 1999 Gallup poll. Incidentally, this is what all of the Gallup polls looked like from about 1960 up till 1999. 90% of people across America in 1999 said they pray regularly. 86% said they believe in God. 85% are Christians. 83% say they favor prayers at graduation ceremonies. 70% favor spoken Christian prayers in public schools. 81% said they wanted creation to be taught in public school. 81%. 74% want the Ten Commandments to be displayed in public schools. And yet, is that what was happening? No, it was being kicked out by the courts. There was a disconnect between our government, our courts, and what the people wanted. 2009, Newsweek magazine ran a story, "The End of a Christian America." What did Obama declare in his first year as president? We are not a Christian nation. The American Religious Identification Survey, the percent of self-identified Christian has fallen 10% from 1990. In 1990 it was 86%. From 1999 to 2009 it dropped 10%. The Jewish population was only 1.2%, and that was fairly steady. The Muslim population was 0.6%. The Pew Forum poll, the percent of people who say they're unaffiliated with any particular faith has doubled in recent years to 16%. So the people who say, I'm basically an agnostic or atheist, I don't believe in God, has doubled in that 10-year period. Meanwhile, the number of people willing to describe themselves as atheist agnostic has increased fourfold from 1990 to 2009, from 1 million to almost 3.6 million. President Obama in his inauguration address declares an unprecedented support from same-sex marriage and gay rights. Previous to that inauguration, what was his stance as a senator? He was against gay marriage, but he's flip-flopped, as has America in a very quick time period. Who's behind it all? Note that all ideas and speech protected except what? Christianity. The effort seems targeted and coordinated. Who would orchestrate a campaign to foster any way of thought, with the lone exception being the gospel of Jesus Christ? This is satanic, folks. And it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen yesterday. It happened over a period of 90 years. Who could orchestrate such a thing over a 90-year period? It's a satanic move. Already Gone is an interesting book that I offer. It's a study that energized our Answers for Life curriculum for youth. This was a study, let's look at the bottom here, that surveyed 1,000 20 to 29-year-olds who were churchgoers who used to attend evangelical churches on a regular basis but have left it behind. Here's what this Beamer report found. The results are shocking. Those who regularly attend Sunday school are more likely to leave the church than those who don't attend Sunday school. We would have thought that was backwards. They believe that the Bible is less true. They defend that abortion and gay marriage should be legal. How could people who go to Sunday school believe such a thing? They defend premarital sex. And we are losing them not in college, we are losing them in middle school. Why are we losing them in middle school? When do they start being taught that they're an animal? When do they start to be taught evolution, that they are an accident of nature? In middle school. Alarming data. We saw a 10% drop in those claiming Christianity from 1990 to 2009. That was according to Gallup and Pew reports. Southern Baptists reported the least amount of baptisms in 23 years in 2011. The number one reason students give for rejecting the gospel is what? Evolution. This is based on the Alpha Omega Institute, Mark Cahill, an evangelist, and the Pew Report all make this same report of the number one reason why kids say, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in Christianity, because science has proved that God doesn't exist. Our goals: always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for hope that is in you and for meekness and fear. Folks, after being in this course, are you armed with a little something to where you can tell people, no, I do believe there's a God. No, I do believe that we are not an accident of nature and that I was specially created. We wanted to equip you with answers and resources so you can answer both your question and those of your kids and friends. Show churches that they do not have to run from science, that it supports Scripture. And another, again, I'm going to say it. Do we need to succumb to what's going on and just say that's the way the country's going, or do we need to resist? We need to resist. We need to stand in the breach during this time. It's all about worldview. How do we see the world? What can you do? Pray. Teach your kids. Choose your schools well. Baylor is no longer a fantastic Christian college. Vote. Put Christians into places where they're going to put Christian values back into our government. Inform your church, which this church does not have a huge problem. There's a lot of churches I can't get into with this material. Pressure school boards, administrators, and lawmakers. Don't let them be comfortable with being politically correct. 70% of the public wants balance. They want Christianity, they want creation, and they want evolution taught side by side. We ought to have that. Again, resist, don't succumb. What have we seen in this course? We've seen theories, we've seen that radiometric dating has huge problems, but we've gave you 70 or more young Earth evidences that the world is young, just like the Bible will suggest. We've shown you that the laws of thermodynamics and biogenesis do not support evolution, but they do support recent creation. We showed you that fossils show up in the fossil record fully formed, which does not match the evolutionary story, but it matches the creation story. We showed you that the Earth, our solar system, and the universe are specially designed just for us, just for life. We showed you that genetics, that variation, and there's no positive speciation. You don't get information by accident. There's no junk DNA, and the coding of 3 billion computer codes in each one of your cells is what puts you together. And computer coding does not occur by accident. It's from a designer, from a creator. Intelligent design in biology. We have looked at things like the cell. The cell by itself is a miracle of design. And we found out the missing links are what? Still missing. Because they never existed. Compromises fall down both scientifically and biblically. You've got a choice, folks. You can believe in evolution or you can believe in creation. You have to make a choice. You've seen the evidence. It takes more faith to believe in evolution than it does to believe in what? Creation. We have not proven anything during this course, but neither have the evolutionists. The evidence better fits the creation model, and still, is there a component of faith here? There is, but it's not a blind faith. It's a faith that's supported by the evidence. God Himself said in Romans 1:20 that anyone who declares He is not here is what?
Without excuse.
Without excuse. Because all you've got to do is look out at His creation and know that He's there.